Well, let's see what we've got. Ooh. All right, I'm going to readjust the camera so you can see a little bit better. All right, well, this is looking pretty good. Pretty good. This settled a little bit more than I'd like. I wish I would have put something else in there, but that's okay. I remember I said I was worried about this gluing in, but did all right. Overall, I think that turned out pretty good. So I still have my hinges here. They look pretty strong. Everything is still flexible. Good. This all stayed down pretty well. Okay. But overall, turned out pretty good. So this is ready for painting. And this is ready for painting. So this is our spine piece. It's what our signatures will be sewn to. All right, so the next thing that we'll do is we will mix up some paint. So we want to use acrylic paint. We don't want to use watercolors, which is what these are. I have fantasies that someday I'll be a great watercolorist. Okay, let's decide on a color. So I got this navy. I'm feeling kind of like starting with a blue. But I need a lot of paint. This really takes a lot of paint to cover. So let's... That's an appetizing sound, isn't it? So I'm going to start with my blues and just see how much paint I have. They'll say, no need to get out, just stay on a lovely holiday. All right, let's see what we've got with all these blues. I always mix... Now these are kind of watery. This is why these paints aren't great. I know they're cheap and they're tempting, but the problem with these is that they are cheaply made. And so they're, again, like that glue, they're a lot of water. So paint is nothing more than pigment, ground pigment, mixed with a vehicle of some sort with a binder to keep it together. It's essentially all paint is. And so what that vehicle is changes. So there's just thinners and other things in there. So this is an acrylic polymer, right? So it's mixed, so it's ground pigment mixed with an acrylic polymer and then water added to make it more spreadable. Oil paint is ground pigment mixed with oil, and then other oils used to make it more spreadable or more paintable. So this, because it's so watery, what you're paying for is you're paying for a whole lot of water and not very much pigment. Like paint out of the tube is more expensive. The quote-unquote artist paints are more expensive, but they're also going to be more buttery, like think a soft butter that's in your butter dish that's sitting on the counter. That's more like a spreadable butter. That's more what they're like. And so never use brushes for this, for mixing. This is a solid surface, a single surface. It's non-porous. And so as I mix, all of the pigment is getting mixed together. Where on a brush, right, this has a bunch of different surfaces, but they are porous. And so it's going to absorb a little bit of that paint. And if I were to use this to mix the paint up, I'm forcing the paint further and further up the bristles and into the ferrule. The only thing holding these bristles on is a little line of glue and then this ferrule kind of holding them in place. So if I force glue up into there, it's going to get up eventually underneath those bristles, and my bristles are going to start to come out into my paint. Trust me, there's nothing more infuriating than bristles in your paint. So that's the first reason. The second reason is once that paint gets into that ferrule, you're not ever going to get it out. And so then you're always going to have like little granules of other colors coming off into your paint, messing up your perfectly good paint. So take care of your brushes and they'll take care of you. You know, this stuff is expensive, right? These supplies are expensive. So don't make them any more expensive than they have to be. So I do kind of like that color. What happens if we added green to it? See if it changes much. I'm just looking for volume at this point, and then we can adjust the color if we decide we don't like it. But I'm really going for volume of paint. I don't hate that color. Like I said, it's a little too pure, so let's dirty this up a little bit. Let's add some of this brown to it. Oops, then I'll neutralize that color a little bit. I'm not doing a lot of brown, just a little bit. I don't want to change the color, I just want to change the value a little bit. So the value is how light or dark it is. And I also want to change the saturation a little bit. So the saturation is kind of how bright or how pure the color is. So I want to desaturate it a little bit. And I also want to bring down the value. So, alright, I don't hate that. I do want it more blue though. I think I've lost the blue and now I'm into green paint. So I don't want any yellow and I don't want any green. I don't want this going more towards green. And I've got a good amount of paint here. I think this will be enough to cover. I kind of like this color. It's kind of cool. What do you think? Kind of out of space, so I'd have to, I don't know, do something. So there is a science to mixing paint, but another problem with these paints is they're designer colors, so you're not working with kind of the classical pigments. So like they do weird things. Like I feel like that blue made this more green weirdly. I don't know. Maybe it's not shifting it much at all. So it doesn't always mix, because there's synthetic colors, they don't always mix how you predict that they would. Which is why I was like, oh, let's just see what happens when we mix these together. Let's see what they do. And that's not great when you're trying to paint something purposefully, when you're trying to, like, I'm just trying to use these colors up, and I'm pretty free with what color I end up with. But if I was trying to paint a portrait or, you know, an object or whatever, I would want to have more control over my pigmentation, and this would just frustrate me because there is very little to no control. I am not mad at that color. And if I decide I don't like it when it dries, I can always paint over it. It's acrylic paint. Should we add a little white to it? Should we tint this baby out? I don't know. I just lowered the value. I don't think I want to raise it again. I don't think I want a pastel of this color. I think that would be icky. I think I'm okay with this as it is, so I'm gonna move my toys out of the way. Alright. Got some water. We've got some paint. Got some paper towels. I think I have more wet wipes somewhere. Alright. Let's paint this sucker. So I'm gonna start with this brush. And when I get started painting, alright, so this is, the signatures are all going to be sewn to this, so you are going to see a little bit of this. I like to paint this the same color as the cover, so it kind of seems like it goes together. You could paint it any color you wanted to. You could even just leave it the fabric. You don't have to paint it at all. I like to paint it because it gives it a little bit more strength. But if you're using a fairly heavy fabric and you're happy with the color or the pattern that it is, I mean, you don't really have to do this step. But I'm doing it because that's the look I'm going for. So I'm just going to dip my brush. I always start with a damp brush. So I usually dip it a couple of times and blot it, just to kind of get it started, because a damp brush is going to absorb and handle the paint better than a dry brush will. And I'm just going to start, painting it. And usually when I'm doing this, I'm listening to a podcast or a YouTube channel, or I'll get absorbed in my own thoughts. Man, this is still really green. I am not going to like this paint when it dries, I don't think. We will see. But it's really green. There was a lot of yellow in that green. Because this is mostly blue. Just that yellow that's in that green has just dominated. So, different colors will have something called tinting strength. Different pigments, I should say. And this, something with a lot of tinting strength, will kind of dominate and take over another color. It's kind of like a schoolyard bully. And this green paint is really dominant. And I'm doing a fairly thin, even coat. Notice when I'm loading my brush up, I'm just grabbing a little bit of paint. This first, think in terms of several thin coats rather than one thick, gloppy coat. You want the paint to be even. You want it to be flexible, so big glops of paint will peel right off. And you want it to look like it's part of the book, like it was made to be that way, not like it's something sitting on top of the surface. So you want to give it a chance to kind of adhere. So the first coat, that's really what it does, is it just kind of gets down into the fibers and just kind of saturates the fibers. All right, so there's our first coat. I'm going to set this aside to make room for my book cover. All right. And we're just going to cover it with a coat of paint. And this is where any bubbles or anything that didn't get nailed down perfectly with the glue, this is where all that's going to come and show its ugly face. Anything that was sitting on your mat that got glued to the surface, that will become apparent. I try not to sweat it too much. There's always going to be a little bit of that. And a little bit of texture can add to the character of the book. They all end up with kind of their own character. Okay, now here's a pro tip. So I've got one coat going with it facing me this way. Turn it around, because guaranteed you've missed something going this way. Even if it's just this end of the spine, which hopefully you can see what I'm doing. So just, oh, there's a little spot. So just give yourself the best chance of getting all the nooks and crannies. This splat mat, by the way, this is 100% how I'm able to paint and do paper crafts in the same spot and sew in the same spot. Like, I make sure all of my painting is on this splat mat. You see how easy it is to clean up, or maybe I'll edit that out so you won't see, but it's very easy to clean up. It wipes clean with almost no effort. And that's just how I keep the rest of my area clean of paint, because paint gets everywhere, man. I remember when I was in undergrad, I walked into my painting studio one day just to pick up something I'd left behind. I didn't even walk like into the studio space. It was like right by the entryway into my studio space. No lie, I had paint on my coat. My brand new coat, oil paint. It was faux fur. So there I am on the floor of my studio, delicately combing through my faux fur coat that I couldn't afford to replace because I was a broke college art student. Hitting it with mineral spirits, hoping it wouldn't melt the polyester fibers of the fur. Fortunately, it did not, and I was able to save the coat. But bright red paint all over this buff colored faux fur coat. Get some little crusties coming up. This paint's getting kind of old, so it's got little crusties in it. Or maybe those came off my splat mat, who knows. You can see it's darkening up as it's drying. See, I like the wet color better. So paint always dries a shade or two darker than it looks wet. Always. So you have to compensate for that when you're trying to pick a color you like. And this is drying way darker. It's drying on almost a forest green. Like, look at how dark that's getting. I don't know how I have a lot of feelings about that, and none of them are good. Like I said, I have some artist paint I can add to our mix here. Now this paint is, because it's so watery, it is actually kind of good for this project, because you can see how it flows really well and gets into all of these little nooks and crannies. So I don't really mind it for painting these book covers. Although I've used artist paints too, and they work just fine. So again, because this is dimensional, I'm going to turn it around so I can make sure that I'm getting all the nooks and crannies from both sides. And you want to make sure you don't have any pooling paint, which I had a little bit of over here. I had a little too much paint. It was kind of pooling up. That'll create a little bubble. And it's just not cute.
ground running. No time to publicize. No, we're not just funny. No, we're not just funny. Our love is easy lasting. Holidays so easy passing. Our love is easy lasting. Holidays so easy.
Okay. Brush health tip number 2 is never leave your brush just sitting in a cup of water. That's the quickest way, or paint thinner or anything. It's the quickest way to ruin your brushes and ruin the bristles on your brushes. So best practice is to, let me get all the paint off the handle as much as I can. So best practice is when you're done painting for the session, for the day, whatever, is to wipe the excess paint onto a napkin or a paper towel or whatever. Wipe off as much as you can. Then dip your brush into the clear water to clean it out. If you just dip it in there full of paint, then you're just gonna have to change your water that much more frequently. But if you wipe it off first and then dip into fresh water, then you're good to go. All right, so I got about as much off as I can. Now I'm going to take one of these wet wipes because I'm not done painting for the day. At least I don't think I am. I'm going to take one of these wet wipes and I'm just going to use it to wipe off my bristles again. And then I'm going to wrap my bristles in because this isn't actually clean yet. All I've done is dilute the paint. I've not actually washed off all of the paint. If I was done for the day, I would then take this brush to a sink and I would wash it under warm water, not hot, not cold, but warm water, like room temperature or warmer, or a little warmer, but not hot water. Wash it in warm water with a little bit of soap. Preferably I like Dawn dish detergent because that's got natural oils in it, moisturizers for your hands, and it's good for your bristles. You can get fancy soaps for cleaning your brushes. I've not ever, and I've got the same brushes I've had for some of them I've had for since 2007 or whatever, I've had forever. So you can, it's up to you, but these here are just craft brushes that I got for fairly cheap, so I'm not sweating it too much. But if you've got really expensive good brushes, for sure, take care of them. So I'm going to bring this back over. Sorry, my cat's making a bunch of noise. She is going to drive me crazy. All right. So I'm going to grab my blue. So look at the difference in how these paints are, though. Remember how the other ones just ran off? Right? That versus that. See the difference? Such a huge difference. So there's a lot more pigmentation even in these, and these are student grade. So student grade, what does that mean? Not as likely to be archival. So archival again means something will last up to 200 years. It's been tested at least to last up to 200 years. Not as likely to be color fast. That's not always true, but it's just less likely to be color fast. So that means keep it out of the light, because if it's in the light, it might change or not stay true to color. Sometimes that can mean, usually it's still going to be acid free. So in art or in student quality stuff, because it's still artist quality. Pigmentation. Oh, the pigmentation is going to be different. In student quality, for sure, it's going to be synthetic pigments, where in artist quality, it might be like ground pigments from like rocks. Like this is ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue comes from lapis lazuli, but guaranteed this is not ground up lapis lazuli. This is a synthetic version, where a more expensive tube of paint would be ground up from lapis lazuli. And you'll notice once you develop your eye for color, which it's kind of like developing your palette for wine. Once you develop your eye for color, you can tell the difference between the blues. And it might seem like, oh, well, you know, you have to have an eye for it to tell the difference. Like, no, it makes a difference. Like, you can tell it's a subtle difference, but it's there. And all those subtle differences from using better stuff can make a impact when taken together, when using paint in paintings. So I'm a big fan for get the best paint you can afford, get the best brushes you can afford if you're going to be a painter. I say this is a failed painter, so take that with a grain of salt. That's much better. But now I am feeling I want to bump the tint up a little bit, so I might throw a little white in there. My white's getting very farty. Getting low on white paint. And again, I'm running out of space, so I'm just going to have to be happy with whatever happens. This is a weird mix of things, isn't it?
You're so welcome. Your kindness really gives me a charge. Hope you had a good Thursday.
I didn't say anything that had anything to do with her. She's really got a mind of her own. I guess she felt she needed a compliment. And I didn't hear often enough to talk to her, I guess. Spend more time in my studio. My disembodied robot voice. Alright, well this is probably dull as dishwater. So I feel like I'm going to stop the video and then come back when I'm all painted up and you can see the finished color. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to put on a video or a book or something to keep myself occupied. So that's where we started. This is where we've ended up. I like that a lot better. I will see you. For you, it'll be in a few minutes. Hey everybody, Editing Sherry here. And actually, you're going to have to wait till next week. If you want to see the entire video all in one, you have to subscribe to my Patreon. Information down below. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next week. Quick shout out to my patrons, Michael, Jenna, Gloria, Becca, Tara, and Trey. I love you guys. Take care. Bye.